the question to some degree is, how do you help someone that's lost? And the answer to that is, if they aren't willing to not be lost, you cannot help them. And I would also say that as a clinician. You see, I mean, it's a statement that's informed, I would say, by my mythological knowledge, but also by straight clinical wisdom, not mine particularly. I mean, one of the things that Carl Rogers pointed out was that there were necessary preconditions for entering into a therapeutic relationship. And that would be really any relationship where the mutual flourishing of the two people involved was the paramount goal. And one of the preconditions was that both people had to want that to happen. And Rogers believed he didn't know how to get the horse to drink once you had brought it to the water. And I've thought about that a lot, because when people are really lost, sometimes they're so lost that they can't be found. And I think the only thing that you can do in a situation like that is get your life together and manifest the reality of an alternative mode of being. That's what you've got. And so that's the only way I know of to solve an intractable problem. And I would say the reason that I went down that direction with regards to borderline personality disorders, because it's one of the most serious of the personality disorders, very difficult to treat. And so I'll generalize from that to situations that are very difficult to deal with. And you know, there's a statement too, and this has nothing to do with borderline personality disorder per se. There's a statement in the New Testament that's really vicious. In fact, there's a number of them, but this is a particularly vicious one. And that is, don't cast pearls before swine. And what that means is, if you're trying to help and it doesn't work, then stop helping. It's not helping, right? It may be just wasting your time. It might be making things worse. You know, if you're offering something and it's not taken, then perhaps you should be offering it somewhere else. And sometimes, if you offer a hand and the person won't take it, you have to stop offering the hand. And then what you do is you go off and you have your life. And sometimes that means in people's lives, for example, that they have to leave their family members behind. There's a scene in the New Testament, this is another very harsh scene, where Christ is walking down the road with his disciples. I hope I've got this story right, but I've got it essentially right. And his mother calls to him and says, I believe that he's supposed to come back to the home because his uncle has died and that there's going to be a funeral. And he turns to his mother and says something like, let the dead bury their dead. I'm about my Father's business. It's something like that. And you read that and you think, that should have been edited out. No, but it shouldn't have been edited out, because it's exactly right, because sometimes the thing you do is walk away because there's no other solution. And if you are trapped in pathological relationships and you see no way out of them, if someone who is sinking has their hands around your neck and is pulling you down, you're not obligated to drown with them. You know, there's a rule too if you're a lifeguard. You know, some of you have had lifeguard training. How do you approach someone who's drowning and panicking in the water? Feet out, right, like this. It's like, I'll save you, but that doesn't mean you get to drown me while I'm doing it. And if it's you drown or both of us drown, it's you drown. And that's wisdom. That's not cruelty, right? So, back to the rats. So, okay, the rats are pulling on the, you can measure rat motivation by how hard they pull on the spring, let's say. And they're more motivated if they're running away and running towards, but let's go back to play. So you can take juvenile rats who haven't been able to play for a while, maybe they've been isolated, or maybe they just haven't been able to engage in physical activity, like many school children that you might be thinking about, neither allowed to play nor allowed to engage in physical activity, and there's a reason I'm telling you that. So anyways, you get one of these little rats and you can measure how hard he'll pull to go out and play, or how many buttons he'll push, you know. And that gives you an indication of his motivation. So anyways, you can see that a play-deprived juvenile rat will fight harder to play than a non-play-deprived juvenile rat. And so you can infer that the rat wants to go play. And you know, you do that, you do the same measurement with everyone around you. If they want to do something, you're going to poke and prod at them to see what sort of things they're willing to overcome in order to go and do that. You'll object even if you don't really object. It's like, it's a measurement device. And if they're willing to overcome a bunch of your objections, then you think, oh well, maybe they really want to. And that's another thing to really know. If there's something you want, you need about 5 arguments about why you want it, because the probability that the person who's opposing you will have 5 arguments about why you shouldn't have it is very low. They just won't have thought it through enough. So the other thing that happens in the future authoring exercise is that you're asked to articulate the reasons for all the goals that come out of your vision of the future. So you're asked, like, why would it be good for you? Why would it be good for your family? Why would it be good for broader society? So that gives you 3 levels of argumentation right there. And if you have it articulated down into detail and it's related to other important goals, then you're a hell of a thing to argue with, because people just aren't that deep, by which I mean they just don't have that many levels of explanation or objection. And it's also really useful in relationship to your own mind, because if you want to do something that's difficult and that requires energy, a lot of different subsystems in your mind are going to throw up objections. It's like, well, maybe that isn't what you should be doing right now. Maybe you should be doing the dishes or vacuuming or watching TV or looking at YouTube. Or if you're really sneaky, when you're trying to do something hard, what your brain does is give you something else hard to do that's not quite as hard, so that you can feel justified in not doing the thing you're supposed to because you're doing something else useful. And if you give in to that temptation, which you often will, then it wins, and because it wins, it gets a little dopamine kick and it grows stronger. Anything you let win, the internal argument, grows. And anything you let be defeated shrinks, because it's punished. It doesn't get to have its way. So that's another thing really to remember, is don't practice what you do not want to become. And because they're neurological circuits, you build those things in there, man, they're not going anywhere. You can build another little machine to inhibit them. That's the best you can do. Once they're in there, you can't get them out. So, and then the ones you build to inhibit can be taken out by stress, and the old habits will come back up. So you got to be careful what you say and what you do, because you build yourself that way. So anyways, back to the rats. Okay, so the little rat gets to go out there and play. Now imagine one little rat is paired with another rat, but the other little rat is 10% bigger. 10% in juvenile rats is enough to attain permanent dominance. So the 10% bigger rat will win the first wrestling contest. Okay, and so that's what happens. And then, so the little rat gets pinned, and maybe they play a bit, and then they're done with it, and so you separate them, then you let them play again. And the next time what happens is that the subordinate rat does the invitation to play. And that's like, you know, like a dog does when it wants to play. You can recognize that, kind of splays its feet apart, and it looks up and looks interested and sort of dances around. And you can do it with any kid that has a clue, you know, that hasn't been destroyed by adults. If you're a little 3-year-old kid, or 4-year-olds are better for this, if you go like this, like, they know exactly what's going to happen. You know, they're ready to dart back and forth, and they'll usually smile. And kids love rough and tumble play, which is now basically illegal in all daycares. It seriously is. Kids need it so desperately, because it teaches them the limits of their body and your body, and it teaches them what's painful and what isn't, and it teaches them the dance of play. And without that, they're just little disembodied blobs. Like, they have no finesse. That's what you're checking out when you dance with someone, you know. You're seeing if they have that fluency and facility for mutual reciprocal action embodied in them. And if they're kind of like this, you know, and just have no sense of rhythm and don't pay any attention to you and all of that, you have reason to question whether they actually inhabit their body and whether they can engage in a mutual interaction, a physical interaction that's going to be reciprocal and mutually satisfying. It's really important to check out. And a lot of that rough and tumble play, even interactions between a child and its mother, if you have a happy mother and a happy infant and you videotape them and you speed up the videotape, you'll see that they're dancing. So one responds, then the other responds, then the other responds. It might just be with eye gaze and movement and all of that, but there's a dynamic interplay which you don't see with depressed mothers and their infants. So, okay, so back to play. So the little rat who is the subordinate one, he has to do the invitation, and then the big rat can agree to play because he's in the dominant position. But if you pair them repeatedly, and this is really worth thinking about, because see, morality emerges out of repeated interactions. Because you might say, well, if you're only going to interact with someone once, you might as well just
take advantage of them and run off. That's what a psychopath does, by the way. And there is room in the environmental niche for psychopaths, but they have to keep moving around, because otherwise people figure out who they are. So they just move around, and they can take advantage of one person, you know, maybe 5 times or 10 times or something, and then the reputation spreads and they got to get the hell out of there. But so it's not a good long-term strategy unless you can't think of a better one. So anyways, if you repeatedly pair these rats, unless the big rat lets the little rat win at least 30% of the time, the little rat will not ask the big rat to play. And that is, it's a staggering discovery. It's a staggering discovery because you've got the emergence there of a implicit morality, essentially, that's even incarnated in rats, that emerges across multiple play sessions. It's like, yes, exactly, that's exactly what Piaget said about the emergence of morality. It's exactly the same idea at the rat level. So it's a massively, and the fact that there's a circuit, a separate neurophysiological circuit that's actually specialized for that sort of thing is also a big deal. Now the other thing Panksepp figured out is that if you deprive juvenile rats of the opportunity to engage in rough and tumble play, their prefrontal cortexes don't develop properly and they become impulsive and restless, and then you can fix them with methylphenidate or Ritalin. And those are the drugs that are used to fix hyperactive kids, most of whom are male. And that's because, well, really, you're going to take your 6-year-old, your 5-year-old, you're going to put them in a desk, you're going to get them to sit there for 6 hours. That's your plan, right? That's a stupid plan. And they're denied the opportunity to engage in play. And that means that their ability to become social is being impaired. It may cause neurological impairment, that's what the rat evidence suggests. And then you suppress that with amphetamines, because amphetamines actually don't activate the play circuit, they activate a different circuit which will suppress the play circuit. So it's it's not very wise. And I'm not going to go off on that tangent because I could tell you why the school systems were set up that way, which I probably will at some point, because it's quite an interesting story in and of itself. So anyways, you've got this little frame. You're somewhere and it's not good enough, and you're going somewhere else that's going to be better. And what better depends upon is the state of these underlying biological systems, and then more complexly, as those biological systems get integrated into a personality and into the social world, then the frame and the goal is going to be dependent on that more complex hierarchical organization. So you're not in here because you're hungry. You're in here because if you get a degree, maybe you don't ever have to be hungry. So the hunger is properly incorporated into your, you don't want to be cold, you don't want to freeze to death in the winter, you don't want to be on the street. You know, so your higher order goals are long-term, socially negotiated solutions to the problems that are implicit in your being. That might be one way of thinking about it. And the micro elements of this, so you could say I'm hungry, that's a physiological state and a conception. I have a vision of how I'm going to solve that, but then, and that's an abstraction. But what you do to transform point A into point B is not an abstraction. You act. You know, so if you're hungry, you actually move your body, say down from the 2nd floor into the kitchen, and you arrange things so that there's transformations in the world. And that's a good way of thinking about the relationship between the mind and the body. Your hypothetical solution to your problem, that's the mind. But the manner in which you incarnate that solution, that's no longer abstract. So, you know, people are always trying to solve the mind-body problem. And that's, as far as I can tell, that's how you solve it, is you have abstractions, but they're not abstractions that are representations of the world. They're abstractions that are representations of action patterns. And the way those are implemented in the world is that you act them. And so it's strange because you've got this weird level of control, you know. I can move my arm, and I seem to be able to do that voluntarily, but I really have no idea how I'm doing it. Like, I don't have conscious access exactly to the musculature, except technically, and I certainly have no idea what I'm doing chemically to make those muscles transform. But my abstractions ground out in this movement, and I can observe the movement and modify it, but I have no conscious access whatsoever to the micro processes that are making that possible. I have no idea why that is. Probably because I'm not smart enough. That would be my guess, right? Is you're only going to, evolution is only going to allow your mind to control those elements of your being that you're smart enough to control. And so you don't get voluntary control over your heartbeat, for example, because you'd just forget, and then you'd be wandering around, and then you'd forget to beat your heart, and bang, you'd be dead. So you don't get to do that. So, all right, so all these different, I classified these again as self-propagation and self-maintenance motivations. And so if you're too hot, well, you want to go somewhere cooler, and if you're too cool, you want to go somewhere hotter. And same if you're thirsty and hungry. And for self-propagation, well, you get lonesome, and maybe you have some sexual desire, and each of those different systems competes for access to this central frame, and that's something like the contents of your consciousness at any given time. So up pops a desire, but it's the wrong way of thinking about it. Because a desire sounds like something that's pushing you forward, but the desire is goal, framework, emotion, perception, action, pattern, all at the same time. It's a little personality, or it's a little story. Actually, when you describe the operation of one of these things, that's when you're telling a story. So I was somewhere, I needed something, I went and got it. It's a boring little story, but that's the basic unit of a story, right? Because I don't care to hear what you're doing unless you had a reason for doing it. I just say, what's the point of the story? And the point of the story is the point. It's directional, right? It says, I went from here to there, that's the point. Here's how I did it, that's the point. And you're interested in that because maybe you want to know how to do it too. And you won't have to struggle through it like I did, you could just listen. And so we're always throwing these little units of information back and forth to each other. And for good reason. I want to know what your point is. Because better I learn it from you than make all the mistakes that you had to make when you were learning it. And human beings, we got that figured out, that's for sure. So, okay, I'm going to just explain this, and then we'll stop. All right, so we're in one of those frames now, and we're going from point A to point B. And so the question is, how does the world lay itself out? Okay, so the first thing to understand, and this is partly the reason I showed you the gorilla video, is that the first thing a frame does for you is make almost everything irrelevant. And that's so great, because that's what you want. You want almost everything to be irrelevant, because otherwise you're going to be so flooded with information that that's what hallucinogens do, at least in their initial stages, is they take away that filter and make everything relevant. You can read about that in Huxley's Doors of Perception. He does a great job of describing the initial stages of a mescaline experience, and what happens is that all of the memory, in some sense, that regulates his perceptions is stripped off, and so he sees everything glowing and alive and magical, like he'd never encountered it before, which is exactly how you would see something if all your memory about it was gone. And so he sees things as way more complex and interesting than he normally sees them. Well, that's fine, but if you're like that all the time, then you end up in a ditch starving to death or something. It's not commensurate with normal life. That's what it looks like. And so your perceptions are just shrunk and restricted to the bare minimum necessary to keep you moving in the direction that you're moving. All right, so the first thing you want to do is you want to make things irrelevant. Now, if you're with someone in a relationship, partly what you want them to do is to help you continue making most of their possibility irrelevant. It's polite, because one of the things, so you say, well, we have a friendship, let's say we have a friendship, okay? So that means you've agreed to act in a friendly manner towards me and to support me. There's all sorts of other ways you could act, like a myriad of them. And I'm going to do the same for you. So we're simpler to each other than we would normally be. And then you go and do something that betrays me. It's like, bang, that whole simplification is gone. And all those parts of you that were supposed to be irrelevant, because we were playing the same game, they're dead relevant, and I don't know who the hell you are. And so that's really rough, and people do not like that. It's this emergent mismatch between their desires and the way the world is manifesting itself. So one of the issues of complexity is that when you hit an obstacle, everything that you have agreed with other people to make irrelevant is irrelevant. And that's generally a disconcerting experience. Now you can, you might want to toy a little bit with that in a relationship, you know. So maybe you encourage your partner to dress differently, or you go do different things or something, because you don't want to be stuck in exactly the same old rut. And so what you'll agree is how you can both deviate an interesting amount. But that's voluntary and controlled. It's not the same at all as having that little mess of 80 million snakes pop up right in front of you, which is the last thing you want to have happen. And so it's so weird, because one of the things that we're striving to do constantly is to keep most of the world irrelevant. And our cultural systems are designed precisely for that purpose. And part of what you do when you disrupt them is you force people to consider a far more range of relevance than they are even vaguely comfortable or vaguely competent to manage. And it just burns them to a crisp. Because what your body does is, if all of a sudden everything around you is irrelevant, like I could say, you're stripped naked, I take you in a helicopter, drop you right into the middle of a jungle at midnight. It's like, you're not bored. Standing there, frozen, paralyzed, everything is interesting. Well, too bad for you, because too interesting is very little different from terrifying. And so, you know, your heart rate's going to be at 160 for like 2 days, and then something will eat you and your problems will be over. So, all right, so this diagram basically suggests this is how you break up the world when you're going from point A to point B. It renders almost everything irrelevant. Hooray. And then what happens is the rest of the world is broken up into obstacles that get in your way and tools that facilitate your movement forward. And that's actually what you see when you come into a place. Like when you come into this room, these are obstacles insofar as you can't walk through them, and those are tools insofar as you can sit on them and watch the class. And this is a tool, and these are tools, and this is a tool, and I'm a tool for, although I'd never admit it, but anyways, I'm a tool because you need to take this class in order to advance towards your degree. And so basically what you see in the world are entities of functional significance, and those are not objects. They are not the same thing. So, and that's very much worth considering, because see, we're trying to build up a case, at least in part, for analyzing the nature of the structures within which you organize your perceptions. And we tend to think that those are predicated on object perception. It's not true. It's not true. They're predicated on relevance conception. Does it help you? Does it get in your way? Or is it irrelevant? That's what you want to know. If it helps you, you're happy about it. If it gets in your way, you're negatively predisposed towards it. If it's irrelevant, it's invisible. And so if your little scheme is functional, your little frame is functional, then most of the things that you encounter are mildly positive. And that's how you know that you know what you're doing. That's how you validate the entire frame. So